thousands of these abnormalities, and it's not practical to test for all of them. However, nearly all these abnormalities are individually rare, and so the usual way that an animal gets a mutant gene from mum and the same mutant gene from dad is that mum and dad were related. In other words, it's inbreeding that gives you, I haven't got the slide, that gives you the animals that get 2 copies of the mutant gene, and they're the ones that show the disease or abnormality. So not inbreeding is the best advice because it decreases the chance of getting all of these recessive abnormalities. Most traits that we're interested in, though, are not simple gene traits. Most of them are influenced by many genes and by non-genetic effects like training and environment. So we describe the genetics of these traits by talking about the differences between breeds, the effect of crossbreeding, hybrid vigour, and the heritability within breeds. So I'm just going to talk a bit about fearfulness because it's one of the traits that's important, and the results actually illustrate what happens for most of the other traits. The first thing I think is, with all of these behavioural traits, or with any trait really, it would really be helpful if people defined exactly what it is they meant. So fearfulness I'm going to define as withdrawal from a stimulus or reluctance to approach a particular object or stimulus, and to the extent that this interferes with what's the required behaviour. Fearfulness is not a problem if it means that you don't stick your hand in the fire, but withdrawal, emotional reactions to stimuli are the main reasons why dogs fail to learn particular things. Dogs don't, it's not that they're not intelligent enough to learn, it's nearly always that there's an emotional response which is interfering with the learned behaviour you're trying to teach. And fearfulness is probably the most common. So what stimuli elicit fearfulness? Well, it's intense stimuli. Big things, loud noises, or it's unfamiliar objects, things they haven't seen before or they haven't seen in that situation before. So a dog may go for a walk and there's the rubbish bin on the road, and it's never seen the rubbish bin before because it didn't go for walks on Thursdays, and it's very suspicious of the rubbish bin. That's the classic fear of unusual objects or unfamiliar objects. It's also possible for dogs to have learnt fears where they've had a bad experience with some stimulus or some object, and they've learnt to be fearful of that. In my experience, this is actually uncommon. However, it's believed to be very common. Every second dog who is afraid of men, its owner will tell you a man beat it. I've never actually seen a man beating a dog that's causing this problem, but everybody believes that is where it comes from. Where fear usually comes from is bad genetics and a lack of familiarity when they were young with the stimulus, whether it was men or something else. So in order to see whether dogs are afraid, you have to put them in a situation with intense stimuli or unfamiliar stimuli, such as walking in a busy street, firing a starting pistol, or an unfamiliar object. And this is just getting back to what Tammy was saying about having a specific test so that you can record the response of the dog to a specific stimulus and rank the dogs according to how fearful they are. So here's some I tried. I tried blowing party whistles at dogs. It didn't frighten this dog. A more intense stimulus, I tried opening an umbrella in front of the dog, and some of them were very frightened of this. This dog, he sort of, was a bit doubtful, but took it in his stride, or her stride. I tried a little toy battery-powered car. This dog wasn't frightened of that at all. And I tried a little stuffed horse, and you'll see this dog showing a classic reluctant approach, or cautious approach. So it's a bit suspicious of this little stuffed horse because it's never encountered one before. So in my research 30 years ago, I had different breeds, and there were breed differences, as you might expect. German Shepherds were more fearful than Labradors. Not enormously so, but a bit. We also had crossbreds, and the crossbreds came out essentially halfway in between the parent breeds. So there was no hybrid vigour. This incidentally means that there's no advantage to crossbreeding for fearfulness, but there's no disadvantage either. Perhaps surprisingly to some people, fearfulness turned out to be very highly heritable. For people who know about these things, the heritability is about 50%. So about 50% of the variation between dogs is genetic, and 50% is due to non-genetic causes. Also surprising to some people, dogs or puppies do not learn fearfulness from their mothers. People tell you this dog is fearful and it learnt it from its mother. It didn't learn it from its mother, it inherited the genes from its mother, and it will pass them on to its offspring. We looked at a whole bunch of other traits, just very briefly summarising. None of the behavioural traits showed any hybrid vigour, but hip dysplasia did. The crossbreds had better hips. Some of the traits weren't so highly heritable as fearfulness because they were more influenced by the training that the animal had had, but they were still heritable up to a point. And some of them had very low heritability, again because they depended on training, or in the case of hearing sensitivity, this was a guide dog trainer's score, and I don't think the guide dog trainers agreed on what it was that they were scoring, and so it turned out not to appear heritable. So how would you improve fearfulness? Well, choose a good breed. That's why guide dogs have Labradors. Crossbreeding is neither a benefit nor a harm. It's not going to help, but it's not going to hinder you. And it's very important to select the best dogs with low fearfulness, as parents of the next generation. How would you measure fearfulness? Well, I think Tammy's already given us a good example of this, is that you need to have some sort of specific defined test. I don't think it has to be as sort of artificial as that. I used to take dogs for a walk in a busy street, and that wasn't as well controlled a stimulus, but perhaps it was a more relevant stimulus. And it's also possible to have other tests of a defined stimulus, like firing a starting pistol at 20 yards or something. How would you actually implement this selection? Well, it's simple, isn't it? You just select dogs with low fearfulness. What about information from relatives? If a dog has a lot of puppies and many of them show fearfulness, well, that indicates that the genetic merit of that dog is not so good. So information from relatives is important. What do we do in breeding cattle and sheep and pigs and poultry? We formally combine all the information and we calculate estimated breeding values.